Alright, Dark Souls 2 might not be the most liked of the franchise, but there are still some very good aspects to explore. And one of my favorites are the memory trees, and if you didn't know, one actually appears in Dark Souls 3 right next to Firelink Shrine. And well, this reminded me that it might not feel like it, but this game is still part of the franchise. So let's look at the many connections that have been spread throughout Dark Souls 3. One of the most notorious and, well, most commented references is our guy Laddersmith Gilligan, who we find atop the Profaned capital, dead and surrounded by what could only be his final works. But at least this time we don't have to pay. While we're within the Profaned capital, have you ever noticed the crack in the cave that looks almost identical to the crack in the things betwixt? These similarities are there, and honestly, this place holds a lot of connections to Dark Souls 2. One of the most discussed is if Yhorm is related to the Giant Lord, and well, their frame and attire are all very similar, but the one issue is Yhorm lacks the giant face hole, and if they were related, I feel like that's a detail you don't leave out. But there is one major connection, and the description for the soul of Yhorm says, Yhorm is the descendant of an ancient conqueror, and well, that could only be referencing one person, the Giant Lord. Although many still believe that they're not related since Yhorm has an undented face. But the way I see it is he's just down a long line of ancestors, and over time his appearance changed. Now, one of DS2's biggest mysteries is the Firekeeper's fourth sister. She's briefly mentioned by Millibeth, their caretaker, and many believe she's the lady in the opening cutscene. Which I do understand, but then who's the Shrine Handmaid? She wears the exact same outfits of the Firekeepers and she's even blind, meaning she also used to be a Firekeeper. It's a mysterious detail that remains unanswered, but there are some likely options, and one could be that she's the fourth sister, and unlike her family, she quit being a Firekeeper and went her own ways. But let's get to the good part, and I've put off the Dreg heap for far too long. On the second half of the map, you fall into a giant medieval building, and this isn't any ordinary structure. It's actually the Earthen Peak building, and throughout this section you maneuver through the now ruins of the Earthen Peak. And it's no secret, the bonfire is called Earthen Peak Ruins, and even the windmill still has burn marks from when you set it on fire. But a familiar face reappears, and an enemy named Desert Pyromancer Zoe attacks you at the top of this tunnel, and this is the exact same character as the Desert Sorceress. But you can also acquire one of their attacks, which is the Flame Fan. And while we're on the topic of enemies, a certain group of knights in DS2 called the Drakebloods believed they could transcend their own banal existence with the blood of dragons, and well, it looks like one was successful. After Osiris, we come across a Drakeblood knight that is sitting in the Path of the Dragon gesture, and once within Archdragon Peak, the same knight is summoned to kill us, but if you manage to turn the tables and kill him, you can now make your way back to Osiris and pick up the armor off of his real body. This tells us that through the Path of the Dragon gesture, a Drakeblood knight was able to successfully transcend and make it to Archdragon Peak. In addition to our Pyromancer and Drakeblood, these dual-wielding enemies also appear from the world of Drangleic, and they share the very fitting name of Drang Knight. But their clothing is actually the same to Chancellor Veliger, the weird phantom in Drangleic Castle. Apart from that, there's not much depth to their connection, besides some references to DS2 and a certain rare metal. Also, for some reason, out of all the enemies to bring back, they took this guy along with them. I don't hate it, it's just an odd choice. Now, vendrick's lovely, completely harmless wife also appears within Dark Souls 3, and Nashandra has a surprisingly detailed painting of her on the wall. But the references don't end there, and you can actually spot a painting of the Broom Tower throne, which appears at the top of Broom Tower, and also Aleum Lois, an area in the third DLC. Now, many have debated why choose these two areas. Well, I read that it's just concept art and someone thought it looked cool. But another boss appears, this time as an enemy. And it's fairly easy to miss, but the Judicator's Phantoms are actually the Ruined Sentinels, or a kind of weird short version of them. But if you look close, they share the exact same armor, and you can even acquire this set, which is the same as the one in Dark Souls 2. But there's actually a fair bit of connections through the armor sets, and well, the most distinct one is the Faram set. I mean, the guy's on the cover, you know who he is. But its item description has a nice nod towards Dark Souls 2, and it ends with the line, "Those who were said to have gone beyond death." And if you didn't already know, this is DS2's tagline. But there's something even more fascinating in the item description of the original Faram set, and it actually foreshadows a boss in the next game. But the item description mentions that these pieces of armor were blessed by the god of war, Faram, and that the mighty Lion Knights worshipped the war god. But this god of war is none other than the Nameless King, whose soul describes him as a dragon-slaying god of war. But as mentioned in the previous items, this god of war is named Yhorm, so maybe that is the name to our nameless king, possibly ending one of Dark Souls' biggest mysteries. Now, unlike any other games, From Software likes to hide major plot points within their item descriptions, leaving you wondering why you're now a squid being held by a living doll. But one specific item stands out, and the soul stream in Dark Souls 3 mentions that the first of the scholars doubted the linking of the fire, and was alleged to be a private mentor to the royal prince. This royal prince is most likely to be Lothric because of this spell's placement, but a more important title is mentioned, and that's the scholar that doubted linking the flame. It's an oddly specific statement that really could only reference one person, or more so Tree Lump, and that's Aldia, a scholar who doubted linking the first flame. And this is where we start to learn that Aldia was a mentor to Lothric. So far, this information has appeared on the Soul Stream, and in short, the Soul Stream and Soul Geyser have the same Japanese name, and the Soul Geyser mentions that it was a family heirloom of Lord Aldia's. So if these two items are the same, and we know it was an heirloom of Aldia's, then that essentially confirms that the mentor to Lothric was Aldia, and he could have played a role in the twin princes refusing to link the flame. Another small item references a pretty big character, and the deteriorated design on the Shield of Want is the same as the King's Shield in Dark Souls 2. But this isn't any ordinary shield, you actually have to kill Vendrick to acquire it, and it has a pretty unique ability, which is nothing. It does nothing. Another shield connects to another boss, and near the Cathedral of the Deep you can find the Curse Ward Great Shield, which is the shield that the Pursuer uses. But the part that intrigues me is its item description, which almost seems to taunt the previous item. The original shield in Dark Souls 2 mentions that it offers resistance to curses, and even its unique trait is having an extremely high curse resistance. But Dark Souls 3 seems to throw that out the window, with the new description mentioning the foolishness of resisting the curse. And even its new ability is completely unrelated. Miyazaki is clearly trying to make a point here, but I'm unsure if it's from a lore perspective or a game mechanic perspective, but if you have any ideas, I'd love to know. Now, one of my favorite armor sets is also connected to Dark Souls 2, which I kinda didn't know until someone commented it, but the mirror set is actually Lucatiel's armor, an NPC from Dark Souls 2. And this character throughout the second game, we see progressively lose her sanity, with some of her last words asking of a simple request.
I beg of you remember my name, for I may not myself.
And well, you failed this request, cause someone else does it for you. But her mask in Dark Souls 3 finishes her story, and it reads, "A hollow once feared the fading of herself, and implored a comrade to remember her name. Perhaps that is why this gentleman's mask is named after a woman." I'm glad to see that her final wish was fulfilled, which makes me happy cause this is a tragic story. Another fairly important group of armor sets appear, and this is the Alva set and Zuli set. In short, these were two characters who eventually fell in love, and I think they get married. But a mysterious character named Karla has a fair bit of connections to these two NPCs. You can find her imprisoned in the Yhorm dungeon, where she wears a familiar set of clothes that look almost identical to Zuli's armor. But Karla's hat fills in some of the details, and it mentions that this hat is the signature of a heretical sorceress, and Karla, however, always kept it close. The heretical sorceress is clearly Zuli, and Karla seems to show some fondness towards this hat. And another item description actually fills in some of the gaps. And the item Dark Edge, which you can buy from Karla, mentions that this sorcery was passed from mother to daughter. So it feels like this game is clearly telling us that Zuli and Alva had a kid named Karla. And just to top it off, you can find Alva's set right in front of Karla's cell, which actually creates the idea that Alva died trying to protect his daughter. I'll also mention that Alva does appear as an invader in front of the Yhorm dungeon where Karla resides, and also near Zuli's armor. So I would like to believe that somehow after his death, he is still trying to protect them. There's also another NPC named Kraden, who appears in both games, and you can even invade and kill him on the Yhorm Bridge. As well as those two characters, our cannibalistic butcher reappears, and in case you didn't know, she's an invading phantom that attempts to kill you in all three games. But many weapons that bosses used also reappear, and one of the most notable is the Fume Ultra Greatsword. I mean, how could you not? But this weapon was used by the Fume Knight, a boss in Dark Souls 2. Another one is the Dragon Rider Bow, which was used by the Dragon Rider's twin. There's also many others, but they don't add much besides just reappearing. The silver cat ring might not be a weapon, but it does reference the speaking cat in Dark Souls 2. And I just want to mention that Dark Souls 3 really did drop the ball by not adding another speaking cat. I mean, this was the closest thing we got. Ugh. But an even bigger ball was dropped, and Dark Souls 2 did not add Solaire of Astora, or even his armor. The Lightning Spear mentions how his gross incandescence shall never wane, and you can even join his covenant from the same statue, which actually appears in all 3 games. But you never see any physical proof of him. I really think it's a missed opportunity. Oddly enough, Dark Souls 3 focuses on some of the more vague characters. And within Smoldering Lake, you can come across an invader named Night Slayer tsorig. He wears the armor of Iron Knight Tarkus and wields the Fume Knight's greatsword, but the ring that he wears explains some of his background, and it mentions that he engaged the guardians of an ancient city and returned with their rings as his prize. But that ring is actually the same to the Ivory Ring, which can be obtained in Aleum Lois. So from his title, we can assume that he slayed a bunch of knights and acquired one of their rings. Although it doesn't end there, and he wears the armor of Iron Knight Tarkus and wields the weapon of the Fume Knight. And with both those characters lacking in appearance, it's pretty safe to assume that the Night Slayer killed those 2 characters. Those are most if not all of the major connections, and I am aware that there are some other small details, such as the kite shield having the Drang Lake symbol and the swamp ring being made out of the flame lizards, but these are all small mentions within item descriptions, so hopefully I covered it all, but I do appreciate you watching up until this point. Have a good one.